Lady of Sorrow, Chapter 3. Author's note. I would be happy if people could review my story and say how to improve it, thanks. At the present being, I was sentimenting vastly thrilled that the beautiful Edward Cullen had chosen to sit next to me. We meandered to the next class together, hardly looking at where we were going, as we were so utterly engrossed in each other's speech. We arrived at the science class. We sat down next to each other. So, Edward, whereabouts in these parts have you moved in? I questioned him solemnly. Oh, I live ages away, near the forest, he emphasised. OMG, me too, said I. That's so weird. I never knew anyone else lived out there. Do you like MCR? Edward perturbed me. Oh my God, I asked nautically. They are my favourite band ever. I know the stupid preps and my dad, he's a prep too, by the way, would want me to listen to Hannah Montana and HSM, but I don't like to conform to the ideals of society. I disgustedly swallowed. Oh, really? The beautiful Edward Cullen excavated. Well, I was wondering, would you perchance want to consider arriving at my abode after school today? We could listen to some MCR and maybe some Evanescence, if you would feel pleasantly about that. Edward spat politely. I love Evanescence. My Immortal and Wake Me Up Inside are, of course, among my top 10 song choices, I happily exulted. Excellent, Edward gusted. But one problem, said I. How will we appear there? My stupid preppy father forces me to let him drive me 3 hours to and from school every single day, I creameried. Oh, don't worry, said Edward magnificently. I know how to arrive on due course homeward, said Edward sexily. Nothing much happened for the rest of that school day. The presence of the Edward Cullen made things so much more bearable, though. Just looking at him was enough to make my insides melt crustily. I knew I was falling in love with him, and it was extravagant. Then, at the end of the day, we walked out of the school gates fulfilled. Suddenly, Bella Swan, who was an ugly, popular, preppy girl, appeared in front of me. Where you going, bitch? Bella sniffed. I'm leaving to return home with Edward Cullen, I asked fruitily. So, you're Edward Cullen, are you? The new kid, eh? The prep exclaimed stupidly. Yes. Does that bother you? Said Edward Cullen wonderfully. Well, maybe I shouldn't let you home, said Bella preppily. She stood in the way with her bitchy, popular, preppy, conformist friends and wouldn't let her get past. Let us through here, Bella, I growled scarily. You shall not pass, the bitch laughed pathetically. Then suddenly, Edward shot lasers out of his eyes, and Bella Swan's face was scalded. Ow! Mine eyes! She screamed excitedly. I laughed forgetfully, and Edward Cullen quickly led me away. How did you do that? I excavated. There's something I need to tell you, Helena. I am a vampire. OMG, I said excitedly. Is that why you are so beautiful? Said I. Oh, I can do much more than that, he said suggestively. Then he grabbed my arm, and we started flying. OMG, wow, I screamed, thinking what the preps would be like if they could see me now. This is just like magic, said I. End of chapter 3. Lady of Sorrow, chapter 4. Author's note. Thanks so much to my best friend Darkness, or xxeddwardsbiatchxx, lol, for co-writing this chapter. MCR forever, girl. Happy face. Warning. This chapter contains a sex scene. The flying was externally ecstatic. I adorned every minute. When we touched down in the middle of a forest, I gasped. Edward put his arm around me. Then he strolled lambently to his house. I came. His house was amazing. It was like a cross between an old Gothic castle and a real cool modern home with huge windows that took up a whole wall. I looked inside, and the walls were painted black with red bits in, and they had huge sofas and beanbags. Inside, 2 male vampires were making out naked. They were almost as hot as Edward. I blushed. Edward laughed at me robustly. This is the vampire way of things, Helena. That's just Jasper and Alice, he explained funnily. Alice, I portioned. He used to be a girl, but he had a sex change, Edward said. Oh, cool, I loved. Edward took me inside of his house and upstairs. I said hi to Jasper and Alice on the way. They were so hot. They were still naked, almost as beautiful as Edward. Edward told me that all vampires are bi, which is cool, because I'm bi too. We went upstairs into his room. I gasped. Edward's room was as black as a stormy night. He had one of his walls painted red, like the blood of an alabaster kitten. He had MCR posters everywhere. There was even one of Gerard Way naked. He was so hot, but not as hot as Edward. He also had posters of Bill Crowlitz, who was also really hot. I almost fainted from the amount of hot guys in the current location and time. "Hey, Helen, do you want to watch The Exorcist or The Grudge too?" Edward contended lovingly. "OMG, they're both shun good films," said I. "Okay, let's watch both," Edward filmed laughably. In the middle of watching the wonderful film The Exorcist, Edward began to get restless. He pierced at me in a way I hadn't seen him look at me before. "Helena," he whispered loudly. "I love you," he whispered loudly. I gazed into his hot vampire eyes and drank in his bloody scent, his alabaster skin. "I love you too," said I. Then he leaned towards me, and we started to make out. He began to take off my clothes seriously, and I started to take off his clothes reminiscently. We were both naked. Edward Cullen had a really big you-know-what, and a sex-pack. Then we made out more and had sex on the sofa. Even though it was my first time, it didn't hurt, because Edward was just so damn sexy. Then suddenly, my dad walked in. End of chapter 4.